Welcome to Leaders Speak, an oral history project in service of the National Academy of Kinesiology, where we listen, learn, and are inspired by the lives and careers of leaders and luminaries in the discipline of kinesiology. I'm Brad Cardinal, fellow number 475 with an election year of 2007. In my role as the Academy's historian, today, November 13th, 2024, I'm honored to interview today's narrator, Deborah L. Feltz, University Distinguished Professor and Chair Emerita, Department of Kinesiology, Michigan State University. Dr. Feltz was elected fellow number 340 of the National Academy of Kinesiology in 1992. She served the Academy as its president during 2001-2002 and received the Academy's highest honor, the Hetherington Award, in 2024. Our interview today is being conducted remotely. I'm in Oregon and Dr. Feltz is in Michigan. Good afternoon, Dr. Feltz, and thank you for taking time to share your story as part of the Academy's Leader Speak series.
You're welcome. Thank you for this opportunity.
Well, I'm really glad to have it, and I'd like to get us started by having you just tell us a little bit about your family background, things like where you grew up and the role your parents or family played in your professional life and the activities and sports that you participated in.
I grew up in Western New York, and it wasn't in the metropolitan area of Buffalo, but it was in that Erie County kind of area. So it was in a rural area, and I was the first of three daughters. My parents didn't go to college. They always said, though, if I wanted to, they would try to make it happen. So they had been supportive of my academic achievements all through my education and into higher education as well. And although they didn't really have any idea of what I was doing, as a lot of parents don't, in terms of their kids that go on to higher ed, they didn't care. They just were happy that I liked doing what I was doing. The activities that I participated in, well, first was, just running around. You grow up in a rural area. We didn't have a farm like a dairy farm, but we certainly grew our own crops, and had an apple orchard, and things like that. My dad, when he saw that every town had a youth baseball team, every town. Not every town had anything for girls. And so he was able to get his hands on some equipment from Erie County Parks and Rec Department. And we formed a girls softball team. So that was like the first organized kind of team. I think I was maybe in sixth grade at that time. And all three of us played on that team. I also was a skier, and that's because we lived in what was considered the foothills of the Alleghenies. It was before snowmaking, but this was Western New York, and with a lake effect. It was a great ski area with just natural snow dumping all the time, and everybody in my third grade class skied. It seemed like, anyway, all the cool kids skied. And so I begged my parents for some skis, and they finally found someone who had some used skis that they're willing to sell at a really great price, I guess. And I was 10 years old, and I got my dream of having these skis, and so I just practiced and worked, and they had free ski lessons by the two newspapers out of Buffalo, provided free ski lessons once a week, and kind of learned to ski that way. And then my dad did some moonlighting work for one of the ski areas that they were kind of running on some rough times and couldn't pay a bill for fixing their big boiler systems. And he said, okay, I'll do this in exchange for season passes for my 3 daughters. And I'm not sure how many years we got those, but that was that. So
Wow.
those were my sports besides running, but running was just kind of running around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's an incredible, that's a great example of just social support and family structure and just going the extra mile there. That's pretty remarkable because, as you said, it's pioneering at that time. There's this all pre-Title IX, and that's unfortunately that's how difficult it was. But it's incredible that your parents did that, or your father in particular really supported that. So from there, you finish up school there, and then what happens next?
Well, then, they said they would support me somehow in going to college. And I wanted to go to a place where I could major in physical education because I thought that was I wanted to be a teacher. My aunt was a teacher, but the subjects that I really felt I was good in was physical education. There's some math and science too, but it was mostly that, and I really felt like I needed to find an occupation. So Colorado State University had a physical education program, and they had a ski team. I had no idea at the time what would happen if I didn't make a ski team there, but I did. And so I went off to Colorado State and spent my freshman year there, made the ski team. But it wasn't the out-of-state tuition, even back in those days, it was hard. It was hard. So I only spent 1 year there. What happened there, though, really set the stage for the rest of my education. I was on the ski team, and there was a psychology professor, Dr. Richard Swin, Dick Swin. He wanted to work with the ski team because he wanted to try out some of his work on imagery and the role of imagery rehearsal and in terms of improving performance. And so he used our ski team to do that research. And I think years later, I actually found, I can't remember where it's published now, but it was actually published on what was it called? In vivo motor rehearsal training. That was the name of it. And I thought, wow, you could do this as a living. I mean, you could combine sport and psychology. That was just amazing to me. So that had been kind of tucked in the back of my mind as I then moved back home and was able to commute. I was able to get into SUNY at Buffalo. And they had a physical education program as well, health and physical education. It's a small program, but the reputation of SUNY at Buffalo was big. So I was glad to be able to get in there and finished out my degree at SUNY at Buffalo. While I was a senior, I took a course it was sports psychology and maybe something else, but we had to read an article by Dorothy Harris from Penn State. And I found out that, well, Penn State had such a program. I could actually go and study there. And so that was the beginning. That was kind of the short story of how I got interested in that field.
I think that's a pretty remarkable story. And here I just want to highlight, since you mentioned Dorothy Harris, Dot Harris, she was fellow number 259, inducted in 1979. So you were reading and learning from some people very, very early on. You mentioned Dick Swin, and I had learned a little bit about him, that he was the first team psychologist to a US Olympic team. And then I saw that he had authored a book that was pretty popular, it looks like, 7 Steps to Peak Performance, during his career, among other things. So these seem like you had an early introduction to some really high quality people.
And didn't know it.
And
I mean, I really
none
didn't
of us
have,
would.
yeah,
You're doing what
yeah.
you enjoy, and yeah, but it's kind of, I think it's incredible. In general, how would you characterize your undergraduate education? You mentioned the specificity of having a class in likely sports psychology, but something else. How would you
Yeah.
characterize it?
I would characterize it as really a liberal arts kind of education in a big university. SUNY at Buffalo at that time, anyway, considered themselves the Berkeley of the East.
Hmm.
And it was very liberal. They had decided to eliminate their football program and focus their resources, more on academics. I was able to take liberal arts classes in logic and philosophy, as well as psychology and sociology, American literature from an African American perspective. And that was very new to me. So it really broadened my view and my worldview. The courses in my department were pretty standard courses. You had to take physiology, first, of course, and then exercise physiology. Biomechanics was called kinesiology at that time, and measurement and methods, in addition to a number of pedagogy kinds of classes that you had to take as well. It wasn't, I didn't have the same kind of of academic climate, student climate, I guess I would say, as I did when I was at Colorado State University and stayed in a student residence hall on campus, and able to take advantage of a lot of the on-campus kinds of things. So I wasn't as close to my classmates as I was at Colorado State, but I had other kinds of opportunities, and the kinds of courses I was able to take, I think, were really superior.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And what did that lead to when you finished your degree? Then what's sort of next for you?
Yeah, well, one of the things also in that degree, because I had a lot of latitude in terms of electives, I was able to take an independent study within my department, and I proposed for that independent study to do a research project and to actually use the treatment that Dick Swin had used with our ski team with the youth ski team that I was coaching.
Wow.
I didn't really know anything about research design. I knew a little bit about research statistics. I had a very, very small sample, but I found that I really loved doing research and posing the questions and just the curiosity. I knew that that Penn State had this graduate program, but by time I knew it, even though I applied, I missed the deadline, and there were no exceptions. It was just I missed the deadline, and you can apply again next year. At the same time, not wanting to put all my eggs in one basket, I applied at some other programs. Actually, the University of Oregon was one that I applied to, but it didn't really have the same kind of graduate curriculum. And I was accepted there, offered an assistant coaching softball position as a GA, and I applied for jobs. This was 1974, and I don't know if we were going through a national recession or not, or if it was more at this kind of the state level, but there weren't a lot of jobs that were out there for physical education teachers. But I was able to land one. And it may have been too because it was in a rural area and I was a rural kid. And I had great grades and, all of that kind of stuff. So I decided to take that job. All the while having my eyes focused on getting that application in early that fall for the following year. And my intention was, because I wasn't really sure, my intention was to ask for a leave of absence from my teaching job. But I was told you had to have 3 years of experience at that position before you could, and that makes, I mean, as a more mature grown up, yeah, it makes a lot of practical kind of sense. But so I decided I was going to quit my job and go to Penn State. And I had an assistantship waiting for me there. And my principal said, well, is there anything I can do to change your mind? And I hadn't thought, about it. But I wanted to give him an answer. And so I said, well, you said there wasn't any money for me to do the coaching that I did. And in that 1 year, I coached softball, I coached track and field, I coached field hockey.
Wow.
I coached volleyball. And yeah. And so the next day he told me, well, we found some money for you. That was my first big grown-up lesson. And keep pushing for what you want in terms of asking for it, and don't just take no as the first answer.
Yeah.
It still wouldn't have changed my mind. And so the rest of the story is known. I went off to Penn State.
So you taught a full load, I'm assuming, and you coached 4 sports.
Yeah.
It was probably unheard of in today's world, I would imagine. I don't know. I do know people that have coached 3 sports, or they're, but it's pretty rare these days. It seems like people, like athletes, they specialize more and more into 1 or possibly 2. So 4 sports and full load is. So you're off to Penn State and pursuing a master's degree. So were you studying with Dot Harris, or?
I started out, I think everyone started out with her. Every single student who was accepted. And then some decided to work with Dan Landers, who was always called Dr. Landers to the students. And I decided to do that as well because I was still very interested in this imagery in mental rehearsal. And she wasn't really interested in that. So I worked with Dan Landers. I don't know as if that went over very well with Dot, but that's how I ended up with him. And at that time, the master's degree program was 1 year, not 2. It was 1 year. There were some people who were able to get it extended and keep a graduate assistantship for a 2nd year. And I wasn't counting on that, so I made sure I got to work right away, and I got on the phone. I was able to get on the phone with Dr. Swin, and he told me about some people at Penn State, Michael Mahoney, was one of those. And so I talked with Dr. Mahoney and made an appointment, went into his office, who was Mike, by the way. I mean, he wasn't, you didn't have to do a professor or a doctor with him. But both of my professors kind of who worked together, Dr. Landers, Dr. Christina, really didn't think that studying imagery where you couldn't tell whether someone was really following your treatment or not because it was based on self-report. You couldn't get a behavioral measure, and back at that time you had to have something that was a behavioral measure to make any kind of inference in terms of behavior change. So I happened to mention some type of covert, I think it was covert modeling. And the word modeling really hit well with Dan Landers because he had been doing some modeling research, and his wife had done some modeling research for her master's thesis. So I said, well, now that's sounding pretty good. And then he handed me her thesis, and here, read this over and see if we can't get something to extend her research. So there, it's really about replication and extension was the way to go. That's what happened.
So I have to point out here that Dan Landers, fellow number 286, inducted in 1982, and Hetherington Award recipient himself in 2009. And I don't know how many you'd be a legacy Hetherington recipient. I'll point that out. I don't know how many of them there are in the Academy, but I do think that that's an important thing to feature here, just from bringing some further richness to your story.
Yeah.
Again, studying with some incredible people, it seems like. And so you finish your master's degree, and what's going to happen next?
Yeah, I was finishing my master's degree, and I was realizing because the graduate courses were a mixture of master's and PhD students. And I was doing some social comparison, and I was holding my own very well with these PhD students, some even better than what they were doing. And so I thought, I could do this. I think I'd like to get my PhD. But I was told that at that time you had to have some college teaching experience before they would accept you into the PhD program. Not sure why. That was kind of happening at more of an administrative level, and I'm just a student. So I thought, okay, I'll go do that, and I applied all over the place. Again, intending on only doing it for a year, and I happened to find a position that was an interim position because there was a woman who was going on sabbatical, and they needed someone to teach her classes and coach the sports that she was coaching. That was at Plymouth State College, which is now Plymouth State University. And I was able to land that job. And so I took myself up to Plymouth, New Hampshire. And I didn't coach 4 sports. I coached 3. Field hockey, skiing, alpine, and Nordic, even though I'd never in my life skied Nordic.
Wow.
I just kind of faked my way through that, and softball.
Wow.
And taught some basic foundational courses, and I think sports officiating, and developed a course on women in sport.
Wow. Were you in the instructional role, did you teach a course in sport psychology?
No, they didn't have one at that time, so I couldn't. I tried to weave some of the women in sport aspects into it.
I can see though that your master's degree would have, I would imagine, informed your coaching, the various sports that you coached, just particularly just trying to build teams and other aspects, I would imagine.
Yeah, it did. And in well, in terms of softball anyway, also having the experience as when I was at Penn State, I was the assistant softball
Oh,
coach. And I did that. I got involved in that because the head coach happened to develop mono.
hmm,
And so they gave me that slot, and I didn't have to teach the one credit, all of those one credit courses that you usually have to teach as a teaching assistant.
yeah,
So I was able to just focus on the coaching, at least for
okay,
that uh, first 2 quarters. We were on the quarter system
yeah.
at that time as well.
So I'm learning some themes. The one theme's coming clear to me is you've had some fortuitous opportunities. You seem very open to those opportunities. You have a plan, but you're open to the sort of what the world's presenting to you. It seems like up to this particular point, even your next plan, which is you're in a 1 year interim position, and then what's going to happen next?
Yeah. Well, it really was a 1 year. There wasn't an opportunity to stay on longer, but if there had been, I would have considered it. I wasn't quite sure. In fact, Dan Landers wasn't quite sure, and he wanted to make sure you're coming, right? You're coming, and yes, I am. But I also didn't want to put all my eggs in one basket. I applied to the University of Illinois with the thought of well, no, I applied to. I think this was when I applied. Yeah, I applied to University of Waterloo
Oh,
because Reiner Martins had taken a position there for not very long, but he had taken a position there. And I applied to the University of Illinois. Glenn Roberts was at the University of Illinois. Um, Reiner Martins didn't accept me.
ah,
I think if he even remembers, I think it may have had more to do with he didn't know whether he would be there to see me through. I was accepted at the University of Illinois, but I was accepted at Penn State, and that's where I wanted to go back to.
yeah. So, and they're back with Dr. Landers. And was this going to be building off of the prior work that you'd done, or was this something, did you perceive that you'd be doing something different from that?
Um, Both and.
Okay.
I was interested in the modeling area. I'm not the imagery kind of area. But when I first got there, within the first few weeks, I think it was, Al Bandura's paper came out, his seminal 1977 paper in, I think it was Psychology Review. And Dan Landers said, I think you should read this. I had been, the modeling work was based on Bandura's social learning theory.
Mhm.
So there was a Bandura connection there. And within self-efficacy theory, there is a modeling component there as well, which he would put under a source of efficacy information called vicarious experiences. So I read the paper, and he said, so then let's talk about it and see what you might be able to do, with that. And so I did, and I thought, well, let's look at the kinds of treatments that Bandura had based a lot of this theory on, which was in the approach avoidance and the phobias area. And his experimental work was, how close can you get to approaching a snake, and can you handle one? So it was snake phobic patients and a number of other kind of people who had different kinds of phobias, and that was pretty easy to then get good measures of. So I looked at kind of a high risk sort of task that came from having to perform it when I was a high school student, and that was a back dive off of a diving board,
Wow.
which is kind of risky to do if you've never done one before. And I remembered that our phys ed teacher actually used what Bandura was calling participant modeling, guided participation to help the students, help us girls, learn this particular dive, this particular skill.
Hmm.
And so that's what I looked at, and then I got more intrigued by what really there were a lot of causal mechanisms here. So how do you tease this out, and how do you tease out if there was a reciprocal nature to it? But I became more sophisticated in terms of my statistics courses and measurement. Was able to, I took multivariate classes and just be able to look up different kinds of research statistics that could be used, and found some, and found resources on campus who had some knowledge of it. Didn't take an actual, well, I sat in on a course called path analysis, but a lot of it was self-taught. I mean, once you have enough of the basics, you can just read and figure a lot of that stuff out.
Yeah. So as you're doing your program there, doing your research there, you're having a vision for a career in higher education, it seems like, or a teaching career of some form. So how do you progress forward from Penn State, or transitioning from Penn State, or the research you did at Penn State, and how that might have informed what you're going to do next?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I also did while I was at Penn State was to continue coaching with the softball team. And that was in addition to, so it wasn't a part of my assistantship, it was in addition to. So I was able to get a stipend in addition to that. And the head coach was going to retire. So I was offered the head coaching job. I could have stayed at Penn State and been the head softball coach. And I thought, why would I spend these years in, yeah, not back-breaking work, but mental kind of breaking work to get this degree to continue coaching.
Yeah.
So I kept it aside for a little while because I wanted to, make sure that I really did have a job. There weren't a lot of jobs out at that time, so I must pick the years to graduate where jobs are scarce. 1974 and then 1980. There were some smaller positions, smaller jobs, smaller schools that were teaching intensive. I applied to those as well. I think I was overqualified for what they were looking for, which was a lot more generalist kind of person. There was a position, it was a temporary position at UCLA. And then there was a position at Michigan State University. And I didn't even know about the one at Michigan State University until after I had I don't know if I had interviewed or I was going to interview at UCLA. That position at UCLA, I found out while I was interviewing at Michigan State University, was pulled. So they
Oh,
decided not to fill it. And then I think, I don't know if it was the year after or the year after that, that Joan Duda
Hmm.
got that position. That I was able to get the position at Michigan State University, and it was thrill. I was thrilled, just thrilled to have a job. And in fact, the person who hired me was Vern Seafelt, also a
Another
Hetherington
fellow. Yes.
Award winner. And he jokes that he says, "Yeah, Deb didn't even ask what the salary was. She just said yes."
Hmm.
I was I was so naive. I just accepted whatever the salary was going to be. I figured it was going to be enough to cover my rent, and that was, that was all I was concerned about.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Yes, as you indicated, another Academy Fellow and Hetherington Award recipient. Um, so you stayed there for your entire career. So you must have had some good experiences there. Um, I do note that you're, as I said in the introduction, you're a university distinguished professor. So you achieved, um, the absolute highest possible rank. Um, and I also know that in Michigan State you served for many years as a department chair, 23 in fact, of what's now kinesiology. So I'm just curious if you can give us a sense of your career there, because it was a long and obviously highly successful career.
Yeah. Um, Dan Gould was there, I think maybe 2 years before I was. I was happy to join him, and we did some early work together within the Institute for the Study of Youth Sports. Vern Seafelt being the inaugural director of that institute. And then Dan decided to leave, and he went to Kansas State University. And I felt a little bit lost. Uh, what am I going to do? I'm the only person here. But I thought it was also a time that I could build something. We just, the two of us just started kind of building that area of interest, getting some students interested. He was very fortunate as well to get Mo Weiss. I mean, he didn't recruit her. She was there, and Thelma Horn. So two, top-notch students who both are fellows
Right.
now. And so that was a reason to stay. And it's not just like, I think probably everybody, they test the waters, and I did too. And I had some interviews, um, didn't get those offers. Um, Probably wouldn't have taken them anyway, but I was testing the waters. And then this opportunity came up to chair the department because we were going through a recession at that time. It might have been called a stagnation, even I'm not sure. But we were slated for elimination. Our department was.
Wow.
And the dean decided not, to do that, that it would be, we were contributing too much um, to do it, mainly, interesting enough, in the basic instructional program,
Yeah.
because that would have just pulled that right out of there. And so the dean asked me I don't know what she saw in me, I guess some leadership qualities. I just became full professor
Hmm.
to chair the department. That was in 1988 to be interim, and then 1989 was the full the full offer for department chair.
Did the chair position there, was it something that was reelected periodically, or you just sort of, you called the shots on that?
No, it was you had 5-year reviews. And so by time my 5th year review came up, I had a different dean,
Hmm.
and I didn't want to. I cared too much about the department to say no, I'm done. I tried, and the dean said, "Nope, I don't want you to. I want you to stay on." So I thought, okay, another 5 years. And each time it seemed like there was something. Uh, we weren't. We went through another recession. We were not the priority in a college of education. I don't think a kinesiology department ever is.
Yeah.
But I was able to, during my tenure, as a part of the Big Ten department chairs,
Yes.
before we went coast to coast as a Big Ten,
Yeah.
um, work with Carl Newell at that time, Mike Wade, I think Dee Eddington at the University of Michigan. There were some others as well to move our departments to kinesiology, because we were all different kinds of names, at that point. And we came together, and I think the Big Ten chairs and directors really pushed the nation toward the use of that one word to capture all of what we do. So I was excited to be a part of that. Yeah, a part of moving the field forward in that way. And I was fortunate, it came kind of during that time, uh, but also willing to and wanting to make that change.
Yeah. You, as you're describing this, and it's just bringing some thoughts and memories back for me. When you first got to Michigan State, were you somewhat of a generalist, or were you hired much more as a specialist? Because that transition seems like it's in your career span.
Yeah, I was hired as a specialist, but not as specialized as people are now, as
Okay.
scholars are now. I think that it came down to someone who is more in the motor learning area,
Okay.
and me. And because I had taken all the courses that Bob Christina offered and even did an independent study with him, and at one point even considered possibly changing, because I was so intrigued by a lot of the motor learning theories and moving into motor control. But didn't. So I was able to teach a course that was a combination. It was like a Bob Singer kind of course. And in fact, Bob Singer taught such a course when he was at Michigan State University
Oh,
for 1 year at the
hmm,
beginning of his career. So I don't know if you knew that bit of history, but yeah,
didn't know.
yeah, he was. So we had started moving into to more specialized areas of exercise physiology, biomechanics, um, sport and motor learning. At Michigan State, anyway, we didn't have a motor control person. That came later.
Yeah. So I also was intrigued, just something I saw in your CV was that your final year at Michigan State, so you're stepped down as chair of kinesiology. And then I noticed that you were the interim chair in an entirely different college. And
Yeah.
primarily I was just thinking, did you learn anything from that experience that you thought might be helpful for kinesiology, or just or that perceptions of kinesiology? Because it was a department of art history and design in the College of Arts and Letters. So it's from
Yeah.
the College of Education, kinesiology, to something very different. Your
I
liberal arts
know.
education might have contributed to that. I don't know. You sort of broad-based
Yeah.
undergrad might have contributed.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I was really intrigued by it. I had been retired for 5 months, and then asked to come back to consider to do this. And they basically they needed someone who was not a painter or a sculptor or a photographer, or ceramics person, or an art history professor, or a fabrics arts. individual because much like kinesiology, we also have those within one department, right? With this diversity of scholarship. They wanted someone neutral who could kind of get the ship steered back on course and help develop their uh, mission, their vision, mission, and values, to have those articulated and be able to start their MFA program back up with kind of a culture change. So I felt I could do that. What I learned was that they do have this, that diversity of scholarship is like probably many academic units. There's a pecking order. Uh, the painters, they consider themselves the the most important, and I don't know after that, but I quickly found out that it was the painters who kind of held the sort of key positions, and uh, I learned that, and I think I did this in the kinesiology department, is building a climate of mutual respect, a sense of belonging, um, and recognition. They really they really hadn't had that, and there were ways that they could be recognized. There were university awards that they were worthy of, and the kinds of things that they were doing, but no one helped them kind of recognized and helped shepherd even the nomination process kind of through. So I helped that, but it also gave me an appreciation for, I think in kinesiology, even though we might be somewhat siloed, over our recent history have become much more collaborative, and we can do things together. Usually painters paint by themselves, and sculptors usually can sculpt by themselves. But they are also, as a field, are moving into collaborative kinds of work and mixed media, and those kinds of things. It's really kind of fun to watch it.
Yeah, I've seen with vis-a-vis my wife, I've seen some dance performances with the mixed media, and I think there was a Canadian group that did the Living Sculptors of R. Tate McKenzie. They took some of the sculpting works that he did, and they created a choreography around that, just as an example. So it's
Yeah,
been
yeah.
interesting to see various kinds of collaborations. Something else that happened when you were at Michigan State fairly early on was that you served as a visiting professor in Stanford's Department of Psychology, and recognizing that you had been highly influenced as a doctoral student by Albert Bandura's paper, I was wondering if that was what drew you to Stanford, and did you work with Bandura?
Well, it was, and I knew I was ready for a sabbatical, and I wanted to move my work to a collective efficacy perspective. That even in individual sports, athletes work in teams. And so what they accomplish in teams, even if it's a track team, it doesn't have to be a rugby team or a basketball team. And that concept was one that Bandura more recently had started writing about. So I wanted to look into how to understand that, how to study it, and I applied. And he remembered me,
Hmm.
I think, from my 1982 dissertation paper that was published in Journal of Personality and Social Psychology.
Nice.
And I said, sure, come on out. So I packed up my Plymouth Reliant station wagon and headed across the country to Palo Alto, and I did work with him. We worked on an idea, and we were going to look at hockey, in ice hockey, because at least within the at that time it was the CCHA, the um, Collegiate Central Collegiate Hockey Association. But it had Michigan State, it had um, I think it had Penn State at that time, the University of Michigan, and some of the smaller colleges kind of in that Midwest. But it was a very competitive conference, and they played Friday and Saturday nights, the same team. So you could do a replication, within a whole season. Did they win on Friday? Did they lose on Friday? Then what would happen on Saturday? So it was really set up pretty nicely to be able to look at that and look at it across the whole season, which hadn't really been done. And what was more predictive of performance, aggregating all of the individual efficacies of the players, or aggregating um, the individual perceptions of we as a team? And what predicted performance, and then how did that performance predict the subsequent efficacy beliefs? And being able to look at that again in a complex kind of pathway model across a season. So at the time, um, we didn't have enough teams. I think we might have had 9 or 10, but it really wasn't really enough to use team as the unit of analysis. And we weren't finding really anything with all of the numerous kinds of correlations that we did. So Bandura never became a part of that particular paper. He was moving on to other kinds of things. I wasn't ready to give up. And so there happened to be a measurement person in our college. His name was Steve Raudenbush. And Raudenbush is a name, big name in the measurement and statistics area. And he said, well, if we did kind of really like a meta-analysis using each team as a study, and then he wrote out a formula. I can't remember, all of the formula, but I said, yeah, okay. And we looked at it that way, and we were able to find some findings that supported, the theory that and the framework that Bandura was talking about at the collective level.
Did Bandura ever have a chance to sort of see the work and respond to it with you, or not really?
He did, and congratulated me on it, and then wrote about it. He's written about it in some of his subsequent work, and I think it's made it into some of the. There was another book that he had published, and he referenced that work is just like the Gould and Weinberg, and Weinberg and Gould series. And more laboratory kind of self-efficacy work. He referenced all of that. So he's referenced a pretty big section of what's been done in sport.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think that sounds like a really neat moment for you, having just the level of influence, and then to work with someone who's so eminent that,
Oh, it was. Yeah,
so.
it was a highlight. It was a real highlight.
So I want to transition just a little bit to just more broadly, during your career and your experiences, you've seen just what I would think of as enormous changes in the field. And like any change, some's welcome and some's maybe not. So are there things that you've seen happen? I mean, you even mentioned with Michigan State sort of coming into the role and potentially having the program be on the chopping block. So I'm just curious if the changes that you've observed, one perhaps is just the naming of the discipline, getting a common name. We still struggle with that, I know, but just perceptions that you have from your experience.
Yeah, I think naming, moving to kinesiology, even though that's not the name that's given to all of the departments that study what we do. It is a lot of them, and the American Academy of Physical Education. Yeah, was I don't know if health was in there or not, but it's become over time it's become the National Academy of Kinesiology. So that's a change that has happened. The becoming a disciplinary major. It wasn't just Michigan State University, but a number of them that became separated from physical education, teacher education program, the PETE. And I think that was very helpful to our field. And I think it also helped attract students. Once they saw, I think mainly that this is could be a pre-professional degree to move into then a number of fields that it didn't have to be tied to physical education.
Yeah.
So I think that was a welcome change. Losing, as many programs have, their teacher education program is a concern. That the jobs aren't there, and it's what happened to us too. The jobs were just not there. You can't have a program where there aren't any jobs. I do think that somewhere into the future, we're going to see that come back. But there just has to be support for it at the K-12 level. So I think that's one of the things I've seen as a welcome. I am concerned about the fact that we still seem to be pretty siloed. And I think that I would like to see more collaboration. The federal granting agencies actually may be driving that, more than the will of faculty units
Hmm.
in doing it. And I think that leaders can do that as well. I think you can provide incentives at the department level, for rewarding that collaborative behavior. I think that the National Academy of Kinesiology, with its doctoral evaluation program, could do that too.
Yeah. We're going to come back to the doctoral program evaluation because you have an
Okay,
important
yeah.
role there as well. Yeah, I'll just echo that as you indicated somewhere in your schooling, you indicated you'd like to become a physical education teacher. That's where your exposure to that as a career option was there. And so, yeah, the loss of that, if we're losing that, then sort of it's much harder to find. All of a sudden, somebody has to discover us through some other mechanisms. I also know that you've been an external reviewer at a lot of different preeminent kines programs in academic units, both in the US as well as abroad. And I'm just curious if you have any big picture observations from that experience that you might be willing to share. Not about specific programs, just
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I think that the programs that are nimble and are willing to change, who can see where the field is going toward in the future, so they're forward looking, they do better. Because I mean, if you're a historian, you can see the changes. Change happens, and can you adapt? And I think our department actually did that. A number of others did as well, and we saw numbers dropping in teacher education program. We became a disciplinary major. Enrollments actually went up. So just having that kind of nimble sort of sense. Those that cultivated a sense of belonging did as well. And even if people were off doing their own particular work, having ways to come together. So facilitating that kind of climate. And I think those that had, more a sense of diversity in perspective, I think that those programs did well too.
Yeah.
So those are probably the three big things.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. Well, we've talked a lot about it, different things, and even though it's kind of been there, it hasn't been as clear as this would be. So I want to just transition a little bit to your specific research contributions, and you've had a large volume of publications and research contributions, and I'm wondering if there's any that you are especially proud of or that stood out for you, that you or shaped you in some way or informed future things maybe in a bigger way than others?
Um, well, in terms of specific publications,
I think
or
specific publications, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I um my dissertation, oftentimes one's dissertation becomes one's strongest kind of publication. I was doing mine at a time when it was expected that you single authored your dissertation. That was kind of the expectation. But um, as a student, that you had a lot of help. Probably the most help that you would get for a while, anyway, as an assistant professor, because you had all of those professors working on this thing with you to make sure that it was going to be a dissertation that would pass. And so I think that was one, being able to get it published in what's considered the top journal in psychology and social psychology, was pretty special to me. Um, Glad to have been able to do that. My meta-analysis, I had no idea that it would become probably the most cited piece of work on mental practice, meta-analysis of mental practice. And that was another thing that was really kind of fortuitous in terms of how it came about with um, someone who was putting together a symposium. I think it was at an AFERD conference, and just asking me if I wanted to be involved with it. And my first question was, what is a meta-analysis? So I had to teach myself, what that was. And I talked with Dan a little bit about that. I had always had this interest way back from when I first heard about mental rehearsal from Dick Swin, of looking at it's been called different names: mental imagery, mental rehearsal, um, covert modeling, just all of those things, and some of the differences that in terms of research that was out there. And it meta-analysis um, helps to try to make sense of different kinds of views, different kinds of results. So that's what we did, and it was the first one, yeah, ever done in our field. So I think that was one as well. Uh, my I also had an article published in the Journal of Educational Psychology on coaching efficacy. And that helped kind of bring me back to the Institute for the Study of Youth Sports. It didn't have to just be youth sport coaches, but that's where a lot of the coaching is done, youth and high school. and then the collective efficacy. And then I put it all together and got a couple of former doctoral students, Sandra Moritz and Philip Sullivan, and published a book.
Yeah, so I'm looking at this and listening to the sequence. Two things that stand out to me right away. So the first is the path analysis would also be fairly early on in path analysis work being done in our field, to my knowledge, in the early 80s, with your work, of course, happening before that. So that sort of stood out to me as just being something that I thought might be worth highlighting. Yeah, and it's in a mainstream psych, high impact factor journal, et cetera. Now, the meta-analysis is actually, this thing I noticed there is, as you said, I think pretty early in our field, perhaps first, I'm not sure about that, but that's from your master's thesis, if I'm understanding right. And looking
Yeah.
at some of Dan Lander's work, particularly later work anyway, it seemed as if though he did a lot with meta-analysis. So you might have influenced him as much as he influenced
I
you,
think I did. I think I did.
because
Yeah.
that became, I don't know if it was, I just noticed there was a lot of his work that seemed to come back to that direction, more synthesis kinds of things and
Yeah. He
takeaways.
found that that was a good way, and I did too, to get students really into a literature that they were then wanting to try to advance. Doing that kind of a review, drawing conclusions, and then going from there.
Yeah. Well, and your book I noticed was highly cited with more than 1,100 citations. So that's I don't know where the citation classics come into play anymore, but that would have to be a citation classic in and of itself. And I also noticed that you did something that probably spans your career, but you have both published in highly specialized journals as well as more what are probably regarded as interdisciplinary journals. So I'm thinking of Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology and Research Quarterly, or something along those lines. Quest is another one that is broader. I'm just wondering how you, or if you had any decision-making processes that inform, like, oh, this seems like a good fit here, or this seems like a more specialized topic that you wanted to share.
Yeah. I think if there was work that was more cutting edge, I found that I actually had better luck in journals outside of sport and exercise psychology. And I don't know if that's because there are more reviewers to choose from. They're more seasoned. Um, they're having something that is a new kind of contribution from another field, from an application. You have to change how you present it in terms of the kind of the introduction to it. Like, here is just another context that shows this theory is better than this other theory. Whereas in sport and exercise psychology, it's about this is what theory works best in. You don't have to say in this field versus another field, although there are some studies, and one of my students did that very well, and that was Sion Bylock, who looked at choking under motor skills versus cognitive skills, for instance. So that was kind of that was the way I had approached it. And yeah, sometimes I approached taking something to Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology, or Psychology, Sport and Exercise, or one of those, and was rejected. And then I went to outside the field and just rearrange the introduction, it was accepted.
Mm. Yeah.
Sometimes it was a stronger impact factor outside of the field than inside.
Yeah. Well, I think we all probably have those experiences where,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
but it may also have something to do with the nature of your work. Some of those transformative sorts of research versus incremental research, and maybe that's representing. There's a delay in the way knowledge is disseminated, and maybe that reflects that as well. There's just
Yeah.
the openness to a topic at a given moment, whereas somebody once told me never publish a paper before it's time. So, or choose a different outlet for a piece of scholarship. You mentioned Scion, and I wanted to just give you a chance to also, that the Academy's motto is to pass it on. And I was wondering about Academy, potentially former students that became Academy Fellows, if you have some of those in your background.
Well, this Sian Beilock is one, and Anthony Contos is another. Those are the only two so far. Although I think Nick Myers is one who is shown to be a real leader in the measurement area and the intervention using the self-efficacy model within exercise. So intervention programs there. And he's done actually a lot for NAK already in terms of helping with doctoral evaluations. And there's Lynette Kraft, who was a student of mine, doctoral student of mine, a master's degree student of Dan Landers. And she has done a lot, even though she had an academic appointment at Northwestern. She left not in sport and exercise psychology because Northwestern doesn't have that, but in psychiatry, left that to become research director of ACSM, and has really shown a lot of leadership in the work on women and exercise with cancer patients and obesity. And so she's really, and a lot of that work has also been meta-analysis work because she worked with both of us, Dan and with me. So she's done a lot actually for the field, but it's not in the traditional way.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, as well as your mentorship of some of the Academy Fellows. Sion's fellow number 524 with an induction year of 2013, and Anthony was inducted as fellow number 577 in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like there's others in the pipeline. I am aware of Nick's work because he's been involved in the last two rounds, if I believe, as a very formal role, and I think informally 3 rounds ago he sort of mentored or internship, if you will, on the prior people running that evaluation. He's been holding a steady hand in that. With regard to just broader societal contributions, thinking about, I know you were in an administrative role and your teaching assignment may not have been as, particularly later, may not have been as prominent, but did you have favorite classes you taught, or something about your approach to teaching or mentoring that you like to share, that you felt was important to share?
Yeah, I because I became department chair, I had to give something up, but not completely, but it was teaching, so that I could continue my research and also mentoring of graduate students. I did teach an undergraduate class for a little while, and then graduate class in sport and exercise psychology. Doctoral seminar that was I think more specialized in exercise psychology because we didn't have a person in that area, at that time. Fairly early on, well, after I became department chair and was still teaching. I'm not sure why I did this to myself because it made a lot more work, but I stopped giving tests because I didn't feel like they were really learning, for that. And there were folks who had test anxiety. So it wasn't an accurate evaluation of their knowledge just because it was a test anxiety thing. So I started trying to get them to think critically. And so for their readings, they had to come up with questions two questions in their reading that couldn't be answered by the text. So they were curiosity questions. They were the how does or what if. Well, that made for an awful lot of work. And then I decided to evaluate them more randomly. So they still had to do it, but I didn't answer all of them. I didn't reply back or evaluate all of them. That helped. And I moved into also some more collaborative work where there were what I called heterogeneous teams. So I tried to get people put together that weren't all exercise physiology students and weren't all athletic training students to mix it up. One that I really enjoyed, and I think the students enjoyed it too, was that they had to make a YouTube presentation to explain one theory. So one theory that they had to really kind of become the expert on. And you got points for creativity on it. So be as creative, as you can. And they had to, film this, and so they had some great YouTube videos, and they loved it. So it was all a part, I think, of trying to develop this kind of critical thinking, and working together because there's so much of work now, whether it's going to be academically or in other kinds of jobs, that you have to collaborate. So there are skills you're having to learn that aren't like you can't give them a test on those kinds of skills, but they learn it.
So I can see also some of the same things you did to develop the department. You applied in teaching setting, particularly later on, it sounds like, and to some degree of success. So that's good. I think it's good representation of this, even the collective efficacy piece, bringing all these things together. Were there 2 or 3 lessons that you really tried to instill, or have you summarized those? Do you feel like you've summarized them, just the collaborative piece, for example? Are there lessons that you felt were important for mentees or students to walk away from?
I think I pretty much have summarized those.
Okay. And I also, before I left the student piece, I noticed in your CV that at least 11 of your former doctoral students, they received dissertation awards from APA's Division 47, NASPA, NASB, and then as you said, you've had 2 that are Academy Fellows and maybe some others that are in the pipeline. It seems like um, you've had a really strong influence on quality work that's being acknowledged externally by diverse organizations, at least 3 that I could see.
I think it's important for students to be recognized for their work. All of my students have worked hard. You can't necessarily recognize them with awards, for all of them. But a lot of students don't even know that they're out there and that their work might be good enough to be recognized. So a big part of that is my knowing that they exist, and then getting them to apply, the writing the letters, that you write for that kind of thing to happen. But I think it's helpful to them, in terms of knowing that they are making a difference enough to be recognized with an award.
Yeah. Well, it is impressive, and yes, your awareness, but also the work has to be, because there's others that are aware, so the work has to elevate to a pretty high level.
Yeah.
I wanted to shift a little bit to your role when you were serving the academy as president in particular. And I noticed that you had formed, looking back at some documents, I saw that you had formed two presidential committees, one that aimed at advancing the academy's doctoral program evaluation, and the second aimed at increasing the academy's visibility. And I just wanted to get your retrospective perspective on how we're doing, how have we done on these two fronts. We've got the doctoral program evaluation that you were in the founding of, and academy visibility was the second one.
I forgot about the Academy visibility one. So I'm not even sure what we were doing in that area. And these days, the way to make something visible is a lot different in terms of social media, and how you might be able to get the word out there that you exist. Even. In the doctoral evaluation program, I think we have come a long way. I think we have a long way to go, as well. Even early on, I had invited a colleague of mine from Michigan State University, Betsy Becker, who was a professor in measurement and quantitative methods, went on to become department chair at Florida State University, in a program that had combined, I think, measurement, quantitative methods, counseling, psychology, and sport and exercise psychology. And she has since retired, but her area was meta-analysis. So as soon as she arrived on campus, I went to meet her, and we've worked together. And I also asked her to help me when I was chairing this, first started as a pilot program for the doctoral evaluation, and how to excuse me, come up with the kinds of criteria, the factors. And even back then, she had recommended that we not do a ranking. And I remember a graph that she showed. We invited her to, it was a conference that I'm thinking it was in Wisconsin, but not positive, showing how little difference there was if you looked at the variance bars between the top 10 or top 5, ranks, and that it really might be better to look at quartiles, and to also go back to what are we doing this for? What are we trying to accomplish? Okay. What is the purpose for this? And is it to get recognition from the National Research Council that we're worthy? Is it to please our presidents of our universities? What is this? Or is it to provide information to prospective doctoral students on how best to choose where they're going to study? And faculty on where, if they have a choice of where to accept a job offer. Those are overlap. They're not completely separate, but they're overlapping. And I think looking at the criteria again, I mentioned this in my Hetherington talk. about looking more at the quality, what might be the social impact. And there are groups out there now who are trying to actually quantify the quality, that move beyond the impact factor, general impact factors, and H indices. So I think we have evolved in the doctoral evaluation program, and I hope that we look to some of those. And I know that there are some department chairs within the Big Ten who are looking at that, and I think they might even be bringing some of their investigation of these to the American Academy of Kinesiology.
So yeah, thank you for that, because I think that retrospective is good. And it also represents, I think, just the evolution. I mean, we started at one place, but as you've indicated before, change continues to happen and we need to evolve. And I think that gives us some direction to think about. I also, before leaving your presidency in particular, because I think another signature piece is the conference that you did, and you did your conference theme that year was obesity and physical activity. And I'm not sure if there's anything you remember from that conference or one to think about. It's remained an important topic, but also I noticed in your work that you've had expanded into the realm of exergames. And it seemed like that linked in some ways. I saw the potential linkage anyway with the theme, and then the Youth Sport Institute. Maybe there's sort of it seemed like all those things might be coming to a point there to me. And I just thought I'd ask you about that.
Yeah, it is hard to kind of remember back. I know that I had some help. It was a team effort setting this up in terms of picking the speakers, and we built in some intentionally built in some controversy. Um, in that area, is it can you be healthy and fat? Is one of them. If I had a takeaway from that, it was like other studies I think have said, forget the weight and focus on prudent eating and exercise. So the exergame, the problem still remains then, okay, we're back to square one. How do you get people to exercise, to move? And making it fun in some way. Sports for kids makes it fun. But there are lots of kids who aren't going to be in sports and are confined more to not very many safe places. So exergames is one way that you can try to make that fun, and those had been started before I got involved in that area, and it was after I stepped down as department chair, and wanted to look at some of the things that we were interested in terms of group dynamics, but in the exercise area where we might be able to make a difference in getting people to do it more. And we came up with, after searching the literature a bit and finding out that I had a colleague on my campus who had been doing work in the cooler effect, which is working within a team, oftentimes just one other partner who's better than you are. And whether it's going to be a competitive or whether it's going to be a sense of this is a team score and I don't want to let my partner down, even though I'm not as good as they are. I want to try to really do my best, was intriguing to me. Could we actually make that work in exercise? Because at that time it had been other kinds of motor tasks, but they weren't exercise. So that launched that last part of my career, which I was able to get funded, and that was a plus. as well. And
Yeah.
it's to be continued by someone, not me, but to be continued.
Well, as I know you've been very gracious with your time. I think we're over the time that I originally set, so I apologize for that. But I did want to finish up with a few things. Then one is just that you've been recognized in your career, your students have, and but you have as well with a variety of honors and awards and recognitions. And I was curious if any of those really stand out for you, or something you'd like to highlight that these were really meaningful moments.
Well, the Hetherington Award for sure is just it it I'm just still kind of uh, shocked at receiving this, but uh, such an honor to receive this award.
I was so impressed at the meeting that I learned at the meeting this past fall that two separate groups, independent of each other, no crossover or overlap, had independently nominated you for this. And I think that that's a real testament that the influence is obvious and diverse. So that's, I think, incredibly well
Oh,
deserved, but
well,
really impressive to hear.
yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was, uh, it's a real surprise. I think the other, two of the other, one, my distinguished, award from Michigan State University, um, at that time, and I think still is the only one in my department. So it helped uh, for recognition for the department for receiving that award. Um, and that award is for your research. It doesn't take into account leadership for it at all. And being able to have spent as many years as I did as a department chair, but get this research award as distinguished professor was, I felt very honored by that too. And then the NASPA uh, distinguished award, distinguished scholar award, was one that I remember um, Dan Landers receiving that award. In fact, I remember Dan Landers receiving the Hetherington Award too because I introduced him. Uh, the NASPA award, he introduced me for that award. He was still alive then, and he was there, and that was that was really a treasure to have him do that.
Yeah, I can imagine that relationship. There was a lot of influence there over the span of your career from being a master's student forward. That's kind of a neat moment, I'm sure. Well, as we wrap this up, if you were to look back and say you're now where you are in life, and if you were to give yourself advice in your mid 20s or early 30s or something like, is there any advice you would have given yourself that nobody gave you, maybe?
Yeah, I think I thought about that. A- And I I think saying Deb, you can do this. You've got some leadership qualities in you. And just because you were the youngest or one of the youngest in your class, I was a November birthday girl. And so especially when you're a year younger, basically, at that time, and so you're not a standout. I was athletically, but that was the only only area. Um, uh, I it's not that it kept me from doing things, but I think I would have gone in with more confidence. in doing that. I think also maybe not to my 20-year-old self, but maybe to my 30 and 40-year-old self, it would be listen more. Just listen.
Yeah. No, I'm sure really worthy advice for all of us. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the Academy?
There's not. I still am very honored uh, to be able to do this. I thank you, Brad, for doing this leader speaker series. I think it's an important thing to do, for the Academy to capture this. It's a lot of work on your part, and I'm grateful to you for it.
It's
And
my
it's
it's
been
my
also great talking with you.
it's my honor. I leave these feeling so inspired myself, and that's where I'll conclude, is that on behalf of the National Academy of Kinesiology, thank you, Dr. Feltz, for your narration. It's been fascinating, illuminating, and inspiring. And I very much enjoyed spending time with you this morning. For me, afternoon for you. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.